A concealed room, untouched for generations. Evidence linked to one of America's most baffling cold cases, a grieving widow's desperate attempt to rebuild her life after unimaginable loss. This is the extraordinary story of how Eleanor Thornton's reluctant purchase of an abandoned rural property uncovered a hidden truth that would not only solve a decades-old mystery, but also heal a community scarred by unanswered questions and bring purpose to a shattered life searching for meaning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The persistent drizzle outside matched Eleanor Thornton's mood as she stared at the bank statement on her kitchen table. The numbers hadn't changed since yesterday or the day before. $38,742. 19 remained from the life insurance payout following her husband James's unexpected death 14 months earlier. What had changed was her housing situation. The landlord's notice sat beside the statement. The charming cottage she'd rented for the past year would be sold in 8 weeks. Market value in Pinewood Valley had skyrocketed, and long-term rentals were disappearing as vacation homes proliferated. At 42, Eleanor had never imagined starting over. Her life with James had been carefully planned. His stable position as the local high school's beloved science teacher, their modest savings, and the small photography business she ran from home, capturing family portraits and local events. They hadn't been wealthy, but they'd been secure, until the heart attack that took him while hiking their favorite trail just before their 15th anniversary. Eleanor pushed a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and adjusted her glasses, a nervous habit that had intensified since James's death. She hadn't just lost her husband, she'd lost her voice. The natural shyness that James had helped her navigate had returned with paralyzing force, making even routine interactions exhausting. The thought of house hunting, negotiating with realtors, and establishing herself somewhere new seemed insurmountable. Her phone chimed with a message from her sister-in-law, Grace. Any luck with the lakeside apartments? Eleanor sighed. The waiting list was months long, and the deposit would consume a quarter of her remaining funds. She hadn't responded to Grace's increasingly worried messages for 2 days. The weight of others' concern had become another burden to bear. Not yet, she finally replied, unable to admit she'd been too overwhelmed to make the call. Eleanor closed her laptop, abandoning her half-hearted search for affordable rentals in the area. Pinewood Valley had been home for her entire married life, but perhaps it was time to consider leaving. The thought sent a fresh wave of grief through her. Leaving would mean another severance from the life she'd shared with James. Her gaze fell on the local newspaper she'd barely glanced at for months. A small advertisement in the corner caught her attention. Property auction. Willow Creek Farm, historical property, minimum bid $35,000. The price was shockingly low for any property in the county, even one in poor condition. Eleanor had driven past the old Morrison farm countless times, a once beautiful 19th-century farmhouse on 15 acres that had fallen into disrepair after the last owner died without heirs. The bank had held it for years, unwilling to invest in the substantial renovations needed while waiting for developers to offer the right price. Eleanor's practical side immediately listed reasons to ignore the advertisement: the certain need for extensive repairs, her complete lack of knowledge about property maintenance, the isolation of living outside town when her shyness already limited her social connections. Yet something about the weathered farmhouse called to her. Perhaps it was simply that its neglected state matched her own internal landscape, something once vibrant now requiring patient restoration. Before she could reconsider, Eleanor found herself dialing the number on the advertisement. Hudson Valley Trust and Loan. How may I direct your call? A cheerful voice answered. I'm calling about the Willow Creek Farm auction, Eleanor replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The Morrison property. Yes, the auction is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the county courthouse. Registration begins at 9. The woman's tone shifted slightly. I should mention, ma'am, the property is being sold as is. There are significant structural issues noted in the disclosure documents. Could I see those documents today? Eleanor asked, surprising herself with her own decisiveness. 2 hours later, Eleanor sat in her car outside the imposing brick building that housed Hudson Valley Trust and Loan, reviewing the property disclosure forms with growing concern. Water damage throughout the east wing, foundation issues in the northwest corner, electrical systems requiring complete replacement, possible asbestos in older sections. The list went on, each item representing thousands of dollars in necessary repairs. The logical decision would be to walk away. Instead, Eleanor found herself driving to Willow Creek Farm for a closer look before the auction. The rutted driveway was nearly obscured by overgrown vegetation, and she had to park 50 yards from the house where fallen branches blocked further progress. The farmhouse itself stood like a proud but wounded sentinel, its white clapboard, siding peeling and grey in places, shutters hanging askew or missing entirely, the wraparound porch sagging dangerously on one side. Yet the building's bones remained visible beneath the neglect. Clean architectural lines, handcrafted details in the woodwork around doors and windows, and the distinctive cupola atop the roof that had made Willow Creek Farm a local landmark for generations. It's beautiful, Eleanor whispered to herself, surprised by the immediate connection she felt to the abandoned structure. In its silent dignity, despite years of neglect, she recognized something of her own struggle to maintain composure through grief. As she walked the perimeter, staying well back from the porch that clearly couldn't bear weight safely, Eleanor noticed a curious feature, a small separate structure behind the main house, almost completely obscured by overgrown lilac bushes. It appeared to be a spring house, or perhaps a storage building, built with the same attention to detail as the main house but in miniature. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A voice startled her from her examination. Thinking of taking on this old place. Eleanor turned to find an elderly man watching her from the edge of the property. His weathered face and practical clothing suggested a farmer, though his keen eyes assessed her with unexpected sharpness. "I'm just looking," she managed, fighting her instinct to retreat from unexpected conversation. "Walter Abernathy," he introduced himself without moving closer, seeming to sense her discomfort. "My family's farm borders this one to the north. Been watching this place decline for 20 years since old Morrison passed. Shame to see history crumble." Eleanor nodded, unsure how to respond. "You'd be taking on quite a project," Walter continued, gesturing toward the house. "But the land's good. Water rights are solid, and that house was built right the first time, even if it's suffered since. Morrison family knew how to build things to last." "Were you friends with the owners?" Eleanor asked, momentarily forgetting her shyness in her curiosity about the property. "Neighbors for 60 years. Harold Morrison was the last one, peculiar man especially toward the end, always muttering about protecting the truth and keeping secrets safe." Walter shook his head. Folks thought he was just going senile, but he was sharp as a tack on everything else, just had his mysteries. This unexpected detail sent a small shiver down Eleanor's spine, though she couldn't have explained why. "What kind of secrets?" Walter shrugged, never said directly. Something about his grandfather's legacy and historical justice. Most people wrote it off as an old man's fancies. He paused, studying Eleanor with those penetrating eyes. "You thinking of bidding tomorrow?" The direct question brought Eleanor's walls back up. "I'm not sure yet. It would need so much work." True enough. But sometimes the things that need the most work give the most satisfaction in the fixing. With that cryptic statement, Walter nodded goodbye and continued along the property line, leaving Eleanor to contemplate the dilapidated farmhouse with its unknown history and the curious comments about secrets kept. That evening, Eleanor paced her small rented cottage, alternating between moments of determination and waves of doubt. The practical challenges were enormous. The house would require investments far beyond her remaining funds. Her complete lack of renovation experience, the isolation of rural living. Yet the alternative was leaving Pinewood Valley, the last place she'd been happy with James, and starting over somewhere entirely new. By midnight, Eleanor had made no firm decision, but she set her alarm for 8 a.m., giving herself time to reach the courthouse before the auction, if she found the courage. Morning arrived with surprising clarity after a night of fitful sleep. Eleanor dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, a navy blue skirt suit she'd worn for photography, clients before James's death, as if the proper appearance might compensate for her inexperience in property auctions. She withdrew $35,500 from her account, the minimum bid plus a small margin, half expecting to return home with the full amount still in her possession. The county courthouse buzzed with more activity than Eleanor had anticipated. At least 15 potential bidders milled about, most appearing to be contractors or developers, eyeing the property for its land value rather than its historical significance. Eleanor registered quietly, accepting her bidder card with number 12 and finding a seat at the back of the small auction room. A well-dressed woman approached, offering a business card that identified her as Catherine Reynolds of Valley View Developers. "Are you interested in the Morrison property?" she asked pleasantly. Eleanor nodded, her voice momentarily failing her. "It's a challenging rehabilitation project," Catherine continued, her tone professionally sympathetic. "Our company has been interested in the parcel for some time. We're planning a small subdivision of luxury homes that would preserve some of the historical character of the area. If you're looking for property as an investment, we have some excellent alternative options that wouldn't require such extensive renovation." The implication was clear. This property was beyond a single woman's capability to restore, particularly one who radiated uncertainty as clearly as Eleanor knew she did. Before James's death, she might have agreed and stepped aside. Now, something stubborn flared within her. "I'm interested in the house itself," she found herself saying, "for a personal residence." Catherine's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Well, best of luck to you. It would take quite a vision to restore that place." She moved away to speak with other attendees, leaving Eleanor feeling both dismissed and oddly strengthened by the encounter. The auctioneer called for attention, explaining the terms of the sale and the property's as-is condition before opening bidding at the minimum $35,000. Catherine Reynolds immediately raised her card, as did two contractors Eleanor had identified earlier. Eleanor's hand trembled as she raised her own card after the bid reached $38,000. The room quieted momentarily as heads turned to identify the new bidder, and Eleanor felt heat rising in her cheeks under the scrutiny. Catherine Reynolds gave her an appraising look before raising the bid to $40,000. The price climbed steadily as Eleanor forced herself to continue bidding despite her racing heart. At $47,000, well beyond her prepared amount, one of the contractors dropped out. At $52,000, requiring nearly all of her remaining savings, the second contractor shook his head and lowered his card. Only Catherine Reynolds remained as Eleanor's competition, her composed expression revealing nothing as she raised the bid to $54,000. Eleanor swallowed hard, knowing her next bid would leave her with barely $3,000 in reserve, an irresponsibly small cushion for a property requiring extensive renovation. $55,000. Eleanor called, her voice stronger than she'd expected. Catherine studied her thoughtfully before making a small gesture to a colleague and lowering her card. "I'm out," she announced to the auctioneer. $55,000 going once, the auctioneer called. "Going twice." He scanned the room for any last-minute bidders. Sold to bidder number 12 for $55,000. A curious mixture of elation and terror washed over Eleanor as she approached the desk to complete the paperwork. She had just committed virtually all her remaining funds to purchase a dilapidated farmhouse she hadn't even entered. The rational part of her brain screamed that this was madness, while something deeper whispered that she had finally taken a step, any step forward after months of paralysis. "Congratulations," Catherine Reynolds said, approaching as Eleanor completed the transaction. "That's quite a project you've taken on. If you reconsider at any point, my company would be interested in purchasing the property." She handed Eleanor another business card with a direct number handwritten on the back. Eleanor slipped the card into her purse without comment, unwilling to admit even to herself that she might have made a catastrophic error in judgment. Within an hour, she had signed all necessary documents, written a check that left her bank account alarmingly depleted, and received the keys to Willow Creek Farm. The reality of her situation hit as she drove to her new property later that afternoon. She had purchased a house she couldn't afford to repair properly, in a location that would deepen her isolation, without consulting anyone who might have talked sense into her. What would James have thought of this impulsive decision? He who had always admired her careful, thoughtful approach to life's challenges. "You've lost your mind, Ellie," she murmured to herself as she parked at the edge of the overgrown driveway, the farmhouse looking even more daunting in the harsh afternoon light than it had the previous day. Walter Abernathy was waiting by the property line, as if he'd anticipated her arrival. "Heard you got it," he called as she approached. "Figured you might want someone who knows the place to show you around safely. Some floors aren't trustworthy." Eleanor accepted his offer gratefully, realizing she hadn't considered how she would assess the interior safely on her own. Walter led her to a side entrance where the porch remained relatively intact, producing a heavy flashlight from his pocket. "Power's been off for years," he explained, testing each step carefully before allowing Eleanor to follow. "And watch your head. There's been some water damage to the ceiling in places." The musty smell of long abandonment greeted them as Walter pushed open the door, which protested with a groan of rusted hinges. Eleanor's first impression was of faded grandeur. High ceilings with intricate moldings, wide plank hardwood floors, beneath layers of dust and debris, and tall windows that would flood the space with light, if not covered with years of grime. "Main part of the house is structurally sound," Walter commented, tapping a beam with experienced assessment. "East wing's the trouble spot. Roof's been leaking there for a decade at least." They moved carefully through the first floor, a spacious entry hall opening to a formal parlor on one side and what had once been a handsome study on the other. Beyond lay a large kitchen with an enormous cast-iron stove, a butler's pantry, and a dining room with built-in cabinetry showing exquisite craftsmanship beneath the neglect. "Original features everywhere," Eleanor murmured, recognizing quality that modern construction rarely matched. "Morrison family were craftsmen," Walter agreed, "built this place to endure. Shame what neglect can do even to the best-made things." Abrit, the second floor revealed 5 bedrooms arranged around a central hallway, all showing varying degrees of water damage and decay. The east wing, as Walter had warned, was in significantly worse condition, with portions of ceiling collapsed and visible sky in one corner bedroom. "Not safe to go farther in that direction," Walter cautioned, but the main section and west wing could be made habitable without complete reconstruction. As they carefully descended the stairs, Eleanor noticed a narrow door beneath the staircase, almost concealed within the paneling. "What's through there?" she asked. "Root cellar access, supposedly," Walter replied, "though in all my visits with Harold over the years, I never saw him open it. Said it was sealed up long before his time." Eleanor examined the door more closely, noting that unlike the other doors in the house, this one showed no signs of the general neglect affecting the property. The brass fixtures remained polished, and the wood itself appeared to have been regularly maintained. "That's odd," she commented. "Everything else has been neglected, but this door looks cared for." Walter's expression sharpened with interest. "You've got a good eye. Harold was peculiar about certain things. That door was one of them. Wouldn't talk about it, just said some things were best left undisturbed." The mysterious door added an unexpected dimension to Eleanor's already overwhelming purchase. What would drive someone to maintain a single feature while allowing the rest of a historic property to deteriorate around it? Before she could consider this further, Walter directed her attention to practical matters. "You planning to live here during renovation?" The question brought Eleanor back to the immediate challenges facing her. "I don't have much choice. My rental is being sold, and I have to be out in 8 weeks. I thought perhaps the kitchen and one bedroom might be made habitable enough by then." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "West bedroom above the kitchen would be your best bet. Roof's solid there. You'll need a reliable contractor who won't overcharge. My nephew Ben runs a small renovation company, specializes in historical properties. He'd give you an honest assessment and fair pricing." Eleanor accepted Walter's offer to contact his nephew, grateful for the unexpected assistance. As they completed their tour of the property, including the outbuildings, a deteriorating barn, the small structure she'd noticed previously, which proved to be an old spring house, and a tool shed in surprisingly good condition, Eleanor felt the first stirrings of possibility beneath her anxiety. "Why did no one buy this place before now?" she asked as they returned to the main house. "Even with the needed repairs, the land alone seems valuable." Walter hesitated before answering. "There's been stories about Willow Creek Farm for generations. Nothing substantial, mind you, just whispers about Morrison family secrets. Harold's peculiar behavior in his later years didn't help. Some locals claim they've seen lights in the windows years after the power was disconnected, or heard voices when the place was certainly empty." "You're saying people think it's haunted?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "People talk," Walter said noncommittally, "but in my experience, old houses keep the secrets of the living, not the dead. Whatever Harold was protecting, it wasn't ghosts." This cryptic statement remained with Eleanor after Walter departed, promising to send his nephew by the following day. Standing alone in what was now her kitchen as evening shadows lengthened across the dirty floors, Eleanor felt the enormity of what she had undertaken. She had committed virtually all her remaining resources to a property that might prove impossible. To restore on her limited budget, based on an emotional connection she couldn't explain, even to herself. Yet despite the rational concerns crowding her mind, Eleanor felt the first tendrils of purpose taking root. This house needed her as much as she needed a new direction. Its dignified bones deserved better than slow collapse or demolition for a luxury development. Whatever secrets it might hold, Willow Creek Farm had chosen her as surely as she had chosen it. Eleanor returned to her rental cottage that evening and began the process of organizing her limited possessions for the move. As she sorted through photographs of her life with James, she found herself talking to him as she often did in private moments. "I've done something completely reckless," she admitted to his smiling image. "You'd probably think I've lost my mind, but I think you'd understand once you saw the place. It has, I don't know, a soul that deserves saving." The following morning brought Ben Abernathy to assess the farmhouse, a practical man in his 40s with his uncle's perceptive gaze and a contractor's clipboard. He spent 3 hours examining every accessible part of the structure, taking measurements and making detailed notes, while Eleanor followed anxiously. "Well?" she asked. When he finally closed his notebook, "It's a significant project," Ben began carefully, "but not impossible. The core structure remains sound, which is the most important factor. You'd need to address the roof issues immediately before attempting other renovations. The electrical system needs complete replacement, as does most of the plumbing. But the craftsmanship in this place—" He shook his head with professional admiration. "They simply don't build like this anymore." "Can it be made minimally habitable within 8 weeks?" Eleanor asked, the pressing reality of her housing deadline foremost in her mind. Ben considered. "With focused effort, yes. We could secure the structure, replace the essential systems in the kitchen and 1 bedroom, and make those spaces functional, if not fully restored. The complete renovation would need to proceed in phases as budget allows." "That's all I can ask for right now," Eleanor admitted. "I have very limited funds after purchasing the property." Ben nodded understandingly. "Uncle Walter explained your situation. I can work with you to prioritize the critical safety issues first, then develop a long-term plan for the rest. Many of these historical features can be restored rather than replaced, which saves considerably on materials." As they discussed preliminary plans, Eleanor noticed Ben's attention repeatedly drawn to the peculiar door beneath the staircase. Finally, he approached it directly. "This is unusual," he commented, examining the door's pristine condition compared to its surroundings. "Have you opened it?" "Not yet," Eleanor admitted. "Walter said it leads to a root cellar, but that the previous owner never used it." Ben tested the handle, finding it locked. "Odd to maintain a locked door to an unused space," he observed. "I've worked on several historical properties in the county, and while root cellars are common, they're typically accessible spaces used for food storage. The mystery of the door would need to wait, however, as practical considerations took precedence." By day's end, Eleanor had hired Ben to begin immediate work on making the West Wing minimally habitable, with a focus on structural integrity. Basic electricity and functional plumbing for 1 bathroom and the kitchen. The estimated costs would leave her with barely $1,000 in reserve, a precarious financial position, but her only viable option. Over the following week, Eleanor divided her time between packing her cottage and helping with the initial cleanup. At Willow Creek Farm, Ben had brought in a small crew focused on clearing debris and securing the structure before beginning systems installation. Their discoveries ranged from encouraging original heart pine flooring in excellent condition beneath layers of linoleum in the kitchen, to concerning evidence of considerable water damage in the load-bearing walls of the East Wing. On the 8th day after her purchase, Eleanor arrived at the farm to find unusual activity. A sleek black SUV was parked in the driveway, and Ben was speaking with a well-dressed man Eleanor didn't recognize. Both turned as she approached. "Miss Thornton," Ben greeted her. "This is Mr. Garrett from the Historical Preservation Society. He's expressing interest in your property." Thomas Garrett extended his hand with a practiced smile. "Ms. Thornton, I've been following the sale of Willow Creek Farm with professional interest. The Morrison property represents a significant example of 19th century agricultural architecture. In our region, our society documents such properties before they're modernized or, in many cases, demolished." Eleanor shook his hand automatically, her shyness surfacing at the unexpected encounter. "I have no plans to demolish anything," she managed. "I'm trying to restore as much as possible." "Admirable," Garrett replied smoothly. "We'd be very interested in documenting the interior features before renovation begins in earnest. Historical records suggest certain unique architectural elements and possibly period artifacts remained with the property. Something in his overly casual tone triggered Eleanor's caution. What specific features interest your society? Primarily the original woodwork and any remaining contents, Garrett explained. The Morrison family were known for innovative storage systems unusual for their time. Underground rooms, concealed spaces for preserving food before modern refrigeration. Quite fascinating from a historical perspective. Eleanor glanced at Ben, who maintained a neutral expression but raised an eyebrow slightly at the mention of underground rooms. The house is hardly in condition for a proper tour, Eleanor said carefully. Perhaps once basic renovations are complete, we could arrange something. Garrett's smile remained fixed, but something flickered in his eyes. Of course. However, our documentation is most valuable when conducted before modern interventions. I could return tomorrow with proper equipment to photograph and catalogue the original features without disrupting your renovation schedule. His persistence heightened Eleanor's unease. Before she could respond, Ben interjected. We're handling some structural stabilization tomorrow that would make interior access unsafe, he said professionally. Perhaps next week would be better for your documentation. Garrett accepted this postponement with professional grace, though Eleanor detected an undercurrent of frustration as he handed her his business card and departed. Once his vehicle had disappeared down the driveway, she turned to Ben. There's nothing scheduled for tomorrow that would prevent access, is there? Ben shook his head. No, but something felt off about his interest. The Historical Preservation Society typically documents properties that have already secured historical designation, which Willow Creek Farm hasn't. And they don't usually show such specific interest in storage features. The unexpected visit left Eleanor unsettled as she continued her work, clearing decades of dust from the kitchen cabinets. What had prompted such specific interest in her property now after years of neglect, and why had Garrett seemed particularly interested in hidden storage spaces? As evening approached and Ben's crew departed, Eleanor found herself drawn once more to the mysterious door beneath the staircase. Its incongruous, well-maintained condition amid general decay seemed increasingly significant after Garrett's visit. Kneeling before it, she examined the lock more carefully, noting its unusual design, something more elaborate than would typically secure a simple root cellar. Eleanor realized with a start that among the keys she'd received from the bank, one didn't match the typical door keys for the house. A smaller, more ornate key with an unusual pattern. With a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, she retrieved it from her purse and tried it in the lock. The mechanism turned smoothly, as if regularly maintained, and the door swung inward with surprising ease. Instead of the expected steps leading down to a root cellar, Eleanor found herself looking at a small room built directly beneath the staircase, its interior immaculately preserved compared to the rest of the house. The beam of her flashlight revealed walls lined with bookshelves, containing leather-bound volumes and document boxes. A small desk with an antique reading lamp, and most surprisingly, a wall covered with what appeared to be newspaper clippings, photographs and maps connected by red strings in a pattern suggesting some complex relationship between the items. In the center of this unusual display was a faded photograph of a young woman, circa 1950s, based on her clothing and hairstyle. Written beneath in careful handwriting were the words, "Charlotte Reed, the truth remains at Willow Creek." Eleanor stepped fully into the hidden room, her flashlight beam revealing more details, handwritten journals stacked neatly on the desk, file folders labeled by year spanning from 1952 to 2000, and a locked metal box similar to a safety deposit container. The room had the feeling of a private investigation office, meticulously maintained but abandoned mid-project. As Eleanor moved closer to examine the wall display, the name Charlotte Reed triggered a distant memory. A local disappearance case that had become something of a regional legend. A young woman who had vanished without trace from nearby Hartfield in the 1950s, her case never solved despite extensive investigation. Eleanor had heard the story growing up, as had most children, in the area, but had never connected it to Willow Creek Farm or the Morrison family. Yet here was evidence that Harold Morrison, or perhaps his father before him, had maintained a detailed investigation into Charlotte Reed's disappearance for decades, collecting newspaper accounts, police reports. How had he obtained those? Witness statements and photographs documenting the extensive but ultimately fruitless search. Eleanor's discovery was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle coming up the driveway. Quickly exiting the hidden room, she locked the door and slipped the key into her pocket just as headlights swept across the front windows. To her relief, it was Walter Abernathy's truck, rather than Thomas Garrett returning unexpectedly. "Evening?" Walter called as he approached the porch where Eleanor waited. "Thought I'd check on your progress. Ben mentioned you had a visitor from the Historical Society today." Eleanor described Garrett's unexpected interest in the property, particularly his questions about storage spaces and underground rooms. Walter's expression grew increasingly troubled as she spoke. "Never heard of this Historical Preservation Society," he said finally, "and I've lived in this county all my life. There's the State Historical Commission and the County Heritage Board, but no society that I know of." This confirmation of her suspicions sent a chill through Eleanor. Why would someone pretend to be from a historical organization to gain access to the house? Walter's gaze drifted to the staircase, though the hidden door was not visible from their position. "Harold always said the truth was protected at Willow Creek. Most folks thought he meant general family secrets, but maybe there was something more specific." Eleanor hesitated, then made a decision. "Walter, I found something. You should see." She led him to the door beneath the staircase and unlocked it, revealing the hidden investigation room. Walter's expression shifted from surprise to somber understanding as he examined the wall of evidence. "The Reed case," he murmured. "I remember when it happened. I was just a boy, but it was all anyone talked about for months. Pretty young teacher disappeared without a trace. Some suspected foul play, others thought she'd run off with a secret lover, never resolved." "Why would the Morrison family maintain a private investigation for decades?" Eleanor asked. "And why would someone now be interested enough to pose as a historical preservationist to gain access?" Walter studied the wall thoughtfully. "Harold's father was Thomas Morrison. He was the county sheriff when Charlotte Reed disappeared. The case haunted him, his one unsolved mystery. When he retired, the investigation officially went cold, but it seems he brought it home instead of letting it go." Eleanor examined the dates on the file folders. "These continue long after Thomas Morrison would have died. Harold kept up his father's investigation and maintained this room meticulously while letting the rest of the house decay," Walter added. "Whatever is in these files, he considered it worth preserving at all costs." As they stood contemplating the hidden investigation room and its possible connection to Thomas Garrett's suspicious interest, Eleanor felt a strange sense of purpose solidifying within her. She had purchased Willow Creek Farm, seeking only shelter, and perhaps a project to fill the emptiness left by James's death. Instead, she had stumbled upon a decades-old mystery that someone still considered important enough to lie and potentially trespass to access. "I need to understand what's here before Garrett, or whoever he really is, returns," Eleanor said with unexpected determination. "There's something in this room connected to Charlotte Reed's disappearance, something worth protecting for generations and worth seeking even now." Walter nodded gravely. "I'll help however I can." and I suggest you not mention this room to anyone else until we know more about what we're dealing with, including Ben and his crew." As Walter departed with a promise to return the following day to help Eleanor begin examining the documents, she stood in the fading light of her dilapidated farmhouse, the key to the hidden room heavy in her pocket. The shy widow who had purchased Willow Creek Farm as a desperate measure had unwittingly become the custodian of a long-buried investigation that someone was still actively interested in suppressing or discovering. For the first time since James's death, Eleanor felt something beyond grief and anxiety, a spark of purpose and curiosity that demanded attention. Whatever secrets Willow Creek Farm protected about Charlotte Reed's disappearance, Eleanor was now their guardian, whether she had sought that role or not. The question was whether she could uncover the truth before those with unknown motives found their way to the hidden room beneath the stairs. Eleanor Thornton spent a restless night in her rented cottage, her mind racing with questions about the hidden investigation room and its connection to Charlotte Reed's disappearance. By dawn, she had made a decision that surprised even herself. Rather than waiting for Walter's assistance, she would return to Willow Creek Farm early and begin examining the documents alone. Something about the meticulously preserved collection called to her, offering purpose after months of merely existing. The farmhouse looked different in the soft morning light, less forbidding and more like a patient entity waiting to reveal its secrets. Eleanor unlocked the side entrance, navigating carefully through the renovation debris to the staircase. The hidden door opened smoothly with its ornate key, revealing the investigation room exactly as she had left it. This time, Eleanor approached the task methodically, beginning with the earliest dated file folder from 1952, the year of Charlotte Reed's disappearance. Inside, she found newspaper clippings arranged chronologically, beginning with the initial report, "Search continues for missing teacher. Charlotte Reed, 23, remains missing 3 days after failing to appear for her classes at Hartfield High School." Sheriff Thomas Morrison reports no signs of foul play at her boarding house, though personal items including her purse were left behind. Anyone with information is urged to contact the sheriff's office immediately. Subsequent articles documented the expanding search, interviews with colleagues who described Charlotte as dedicated and well-liked, and statements from her distraught parents who had traveled from Ohio after being notified of their daughter's disappearance. The final article in the sequence, dated 6 months later, reported the case as officially unsolved but ongoing, with Sheriff Morrison quoted as saying, "This department will never cease seeking the truth about Miss Reed's disappearance." Eleanor moved to the handwritten journals, finding the first, also dated 1952, in Thomas Morrison's careful penmanship. His entries revealed a dedicated lawman, increasingly frustrated by lack of evidence and departmental pressure to prioritize other cases. May 17, 1952, Chief Deputy suggests reducing manpower on Reed case. Claims we've exhausted all leads. He's wrong. Something doesn't fit with Whitaker's statement about seeing her at the bus station. Time doesn't align with Mrs. Porter's account from the boarding house. June 3, 1952, received anonymous note, suggesting I look into connection with Councilman Hargrove. No specific allegations, just ask about his special tutoring sessions. Interviewed Hargrove, who became hostile, threatened to call the mayor about harassment. Something there worth pursuing. June 10, 1952, pressure from mayor's office to close case as likely voluntary departure. Political interference becoming obvious. Reed's parents insist Charlotte would never abandon her students mid-term. I believe them. As Eleanor continued reading, the entries grew increasingly personal, revealing Thomas Morrison's growing obsession with the case and his conviction that influential people were obstructing justice. August 30, 1952, Officially removed from Reed investigation today. Case reassigned to Deputy Collins, who has clear instructions to wrap it up quietly. This isn't over. Moving my files home where they can't be lost or altered. The revelation that Thomas Morrison had been forced off the investigation explained why he had established this private research room. What began as professional dedication had evolved into a personal crusade for justice. Eleanor felt a surprising kinship with this long-dead sheriff whose determination had preserved evidence others wanted buried. A vehicle door slamming outside interrupted Eleanor's reading. Through the dusty window, she spotted Thomas Garrett's black SUV in the driveway again, earlier than expected. Quickly gathering the journal, she locked the hidden room and hurried to intercept him before he could approach the house. "Mr. Garrett," she called, stepping onto the porch. "I thought we agreed on next week for your documentation visit." Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My schedule unexpectedly cleared, and I thought I'd try my luck. Historical preservation waits for no one, especially with renovation already underway." "I'm afraid today still isn't possible," Eleanor replied, summoning firmness she rarely displayed. "The structural assessment is ongoing, and safety protocols don't allow additional personnel on site." "Perhaps I could just quickly document the main entryway," Garrett pressed. "It would only take a few minutes." "I'm sorry, but I must insist on adhering to the contractor's safety guidelines," Eleanor maintained, standing her ground despite her discomfort with confrontation. "I'll contact you when the property is safe for your documentation." Garrett's pleasant facade slipped momentarily, revealing frustration before he smoothly recovered. "Of course, safety first. I'll await your call." As he turned to leave, he added casually, "By the way, local historical records mention unique architectural features in this property, storage spaces built between walls, hidden compartments. Quite innovative for their time. I'd be particularly interested in documenting those." "I'll make a note of your interest," Eleanor replied neutrally, watching as he returned to his vehicle and departed with a final assessing glance at the house. Walter's truck arrived minutes later, finding Eleanor still on the porch, processing the encounter. "Garrett again?" he asked, noting her troubled expression. Eleanor nodded, recounting the conversation and Garrett's specific interest in hidden spaces. "He's definitely looking for something beyond historical documentation." "Let's see what else the Morrison investigation reveals," Walter suggested. "Might give us a better idea of what he's really after." They returned to the hidden room, where Eleanor shared what she'd learned about Thomas Morrison's forced removal from the Charlotte Reed case. Walter examined the wall of connected evidence, focusing on photographs of key individuals mentioned. "In the sheriff's journal, I recognize some of these names," he noted. "Councilman Hargrove became Mayor Hargrove a few years after this case. His son is currently a state senator. And this man," he indicated a photograph labeled Judge William Preston, "was one of the most powerful legal figures in the county for decades. His grandson sits on the state Supreme Court now." "You're saying these were influential families," Eleanor observed. "Still are," Walter confirmed. "The kind of families that could pressure a sheriff to abandon an investigation that might prove embarrassing." They continued through the chronological files, moving into the 1960s when Thomas Morrison's health was failing and his son Harold began adding to the investigation. Harold's entries were equally meticulous, but reflected a different approach. Where his father had pursued official channels until blocked, Harold worked more discreetly, cultivating relationships with courthouse clerks, newspaper archivists, and others with access to information. A notation from 1967 caught Eleanor's attention. "Received package from NP. Charlotte's personal effects retrieved from courthouse evidence before scheduled destruction. Confirms father's suspicions about tampered evidence. Most significant, her diary with missing pages." "NP?" Eleanor questioned. "Nancy Porter, most likely," Walter suggested. She was the court clerk for decades, never married, lived alone in that little house by the library, passed away about 10 years ago. The reference diary was not immediately evident among the files, prompting Eleanor to search more thoroughly through the document boxes. In the third box, she found a small leather-bound volume wrapped carefully in acid-free paper. The cover bore Charlotte Reed's name in delicate handwriting, and inside, the entries of a young teacher enthusiastic about her first position away from home. The diary entries were mundane at first. Charlotte's impressions of Hartfield, her struggles with classroom management, her friendship with fellow boarding house resident Marion Ellis. Then, approximately 2 months before her disappearance, the tone changed. March 12th, 1952. Uncomfortable situation today. CM asked me to provide special tutoring to his son after receiving a D on his history exam. Something in his manner made me uneasy. Suggested group study session instead, which he dismissed as insufficient. Will discuss with Principal Thomas tomorrow. March 15th, 1952. Principal Thomas, oddly dismissive of my concerns, suggested I should be flattered by attention from prominent families. Unclear what he meant. Agreed to tutoring sessions, but only in school library, not private residence as requested. April 2nd, 1952. Disturbing conversation with me today. She confided similar uncomfortable requests last year from same source. Says she was transferred to different classes after refusing. Warned me to be careful. Not sure who to trust with this information. The entries continued, documenting escalating pressure and veiled threats regarding Charlotte's teaching position if she didn't cooperate with certain community expectations. The final entry, dated just 2 days before her disappearance, was particularly troubling. April 27th, 1952. Cannot continue this way. Evidence collected and secured with backup copies. Will present to Sheriff Morrison tomorrow, despite warnings. Truth must be revealed regardless of consequences. If something happens to me, the evidence is hidden where only the righteous will find it. Eleanor looked up from the diary, meeting Walter's concerned gaze. She knew she was in danger, Eleanor said quietly, and she hid evidence somewhere she thought would be safe. Evidence of what, though? Walter wondered. And where would she hide it? Eleanor returned to the wall display, studying the connected items with fresh understanding. These aren't just case notes, she realized. Harold Morrison was trying to piece together where Charlotte might have hidden her evidence. Look at these locations marked on the map, all places searched during the initial investigation. A notation beside the locked metal box caught her attention. Potential location identified 1998, awaiting verification before recovery attempt. Property transaction required. What property transaction? Eleanor wondered aloud, examining the box's unusual lock. Unlike the door key, nothing among the keys she'd received appeared to match this lock. Their investigation was interrupted by the arrival of Ben's construction crew, requiring Eleanor to lock the hidden room before workers entered the house. Throughout the day, as renovations continued on the kitchen and west bedroom, Eleanor's mind repeatedly returned to Charlotte Reed's final diary entry and the mysterious evidence mentioned. During a break in construction activity, Eleanor approached Ben with what she hoped was a casual question. The original owner of this property. Do you know if the Morrison family owned other buildings in the area? Perhaps in town? Ben considered the question. Not that I'm aware of. The Morrisons were primarily known for this farm. Why do you ask? Just trying to understand the property's history, Eleanor replied vaguely. Walter mentioned something about a transaction the previous owner was considering before he died. That might have been the spring house, Ben suggested. There was some dispute about whether it stood on Morrison land or neighboring property. A survey in the late 1990s apparently confirmed it was fully on Morrison land, though there had been questions previously. This casual information sent Eleanor's thoughts racing. The spring house, the small structure she'd noticed on her first visit, almost hidden behind overgrown lilacs. Could that be the property transaction referenced in Harold Morrison's notes? When the workers departed for the day, Eleanor immediately sought out Walter, who had been helping clear debris from the barn. "The spring house," she said without preamble. "Was there ever a question about who owned it?" Walter's eyebrows rose at her intensity. "Yes, actually. For decades, there was uncertainty about whether it sat on Morrison land or the adjacent Peterson property. A survey finally settled it around 1998 or 99, confirming it belonged to Willow Creek Farm." "And Charlotte Reed, did she have any connection to this property?" Eleanor pressed. Walter's expression shifted as he made the connection. "Not that I recall ever hearing, but—" He paused, thinking. Harold's mother was a Reed before marriage, could have been a distant relation. With growing excitement, Eleanor shared her theory that the spring house might be connected to Charlotte's hidden evidence. As evening approached, they made their way through the overgrown path to the small stone structure nestled against a gentle slope. Unlike the farmhouse, the spring house showed signs of recent maintenance. The wooden door had been replaced within the past decade, and the stone walls remained solidly mortared despite their age. A sturdy padlock secured the entrance. Harold maintained this place even when the main house was declining, Walter observed. "Came out here at least monthly, according to my father." None of Eleanor's keys fit the padlock, but Walter produced a set of bolt cutters from his truck. "Advantages of farming," he explained as he cut through the metal with surprising ease. The interior of the spring house was cool and dimly lit by the fading evening light filtering through small windows. A natural spring bubbled up through a stone basin in the center, its water crystal clear. Stone shelves along the walls would once have held dairy products and other perishables needing cool storage. Instead, she had found purpose in becoming the unlikely guardian of a young woman's courage from 70 years earlier. Whatever came next, further intimidation from the Hargrove family, financial challenges with the renovation, or personal risk in pursuing justice, Eleanor knew she could not abandon Charlotte Reed again. "We'll continue tomorrow," Walter said, as he prepared to leave with the secured evidence. "I have some contacts who might help us understand our options without attracting attention." Eleanor nodded, suddenly exhausted by the day's revelations. "I'll meet you in the morning. There must be more in the investigation room that can help us piece this together." As Walter's truck disappeared down the driveway, Eleanor locked the farmhouse carefully, particularly the hidden room beneath the stairs. Outside, darkness had settled completely over Willow Creek Farm, the stars emerging in brilliant clarity. Away from town lights, somewhere on these grounds, Charlotte Reed had hidden evidence of corruption before disappearing forever. Somehow, against all odds, that evidence had remained protected until Eleanor arrived to uncover it. The weight of this responsibility should have felt crushing to someone who had spent months barely able to function through grief. Instead, Eleanor felt an unfamiliar lightness, the sensation of purpose replacing emptiness, of courage displacing fear. Charlotte Reed had faced powerful enemies alone. Eleanor Thornton would not make the same mistake. As she drove back to her rented cottage for what would be one of her final nights there, Eleanor found herself speaking aloud to James, as she often did in private moments. "I bought a house and found myself in the middle of a 70-year-old murder mystery. Not exactly what I planned, but then again, nothing has gone according to plan since losing you. Maybe that's the point. There is no plan anymore, just choices about who I want to be in this unexpected life." The shy widow who had purchased A foreclosed farm, out of desperate necessity, was discovering an unexpected truth, that finding purpose often comes not from careful planning, but from courageous response to circumstances never anticipated. Charlotte Reed's voice had been silenced decades ago, but through Eleanor Thornton, her truth might finally be heard. Morning arrived with a soft rain pattering against the windows of Eleanor's cottage as she finished packing the last of her belongings. In just 6 days, she would need to vacate the rental completely, making the renovation timeline at Willow Creek Farm increasingly urgent. Yet her thoughts remained fixed not on construction schedules, but on Charlotte Reed's evidence. And the confrontation with David Hargrove. Eleanor's phone rang as she loaded another box into her car, Walter Abernathy calling with news. "I've spoken with my nephew Michael," he began without preamble. "He's an investigative journalist with the state newspaper, worked on several cold cases over the years. He's interested in Charlotte's story, but cautions we need absolute discretion." "Can we trust him?" Eleanor asked, the previous day's encounter having sharpened her wariness. "With my life," Walter assured her. "He's built his career exposing corruption regardless of who it hurts. Made plenty of powerful enemies doing it too. He's driving down from the city today to review what we've found." The promise of professional assistance lifted Eleanor's spirits as she navigated the muddy driveway to Willow Creek Farm. Ben's crew was already at work, making steady progress on the kitchen plumbing installation. She greeted them briefly before slipping away to the hidden room, eager to continue examining the investigation materials before Walter arrived with his nephew. The folders from the 1970s revealed Harold Morrison's investigation taking a more structured approach than his father's. Initial work. He had methodically interviewed former classmates of Charlotte Reed, fellow teachers who had worked at Hartfield High School during the same period, and even retired police officers who had participated in the original search. Most notably, Harold had compiled a list of young female teachers who had abruptly left their positions in the 5 years before and after Charlotte's disappearance, 17 in total, an unusually high number for a small district. One notation particularly caught Eleanor's attention. 1975 located Marion Ellis, now Parker, in Seattle. Confirmed CE confided fears about Hargrove's inappropriate behavior toward female staff. Me left teaching 1 month after CE disappeared, citing health concerns. Actual reason, threatened with dismissal after questioning CE's disappearance. Me believes something happened at Ridgeline Quarry, but has no direct evidence. The Ridgeline Quarry, Eleanor vaguely recalled the location, an abandoned limestone operation in the hills, about 5 miles from town. She searched the wall display, finding it marked on Harold's map with a question mark. Further entries showed Harold had investigated the quarry site multiple times over decades, including arranging flyover photographs and consulting with a geology professor about changes to the quarry between 1952 and later years. His notes indicated the quarry had been partially filled during a highway construction project in 1954, repurposing the site as a disposal location for excavation materials. "They literally buried the evidence," Eleanor murmured, pieces connecting. In her mind, if Charlotte had been killed and her body disposed of at the quarry, the subsequent filling project would have effectively concealed any trace, whether by coincidence or design. A soft knock at the front door interrupted her investigation. Through the window, she saw Walter's truck along with an unfamiliar sedan. Eleanor carefully locked the hidden room before answering the door. Walter introduced his nephew Michael Abernathy, a serious-looking man in his 50s, with intelligent eyes that assessed Eleanor with professional interest. "Miss Thornton," he greeted her with a firm handshake, "Uncle Walter says you've uncovered something significant about the Charlotte Reed case." Eleanor led them to the kitchen, the only semi-functional room in the house. I should tell you that we had visitors yesterday, Thomas Garrett and David Hargrove. They seemed very interested in historical materials that might have been hidden here. Michael's expression sharpened. David Hargrove himself came here? That's telling. The Hargroves don't typically handle matters personally unless they're significant. They offered to buy the property at a premium, Eleanor added. When I refused, the implication was that I might not understand the complexities involved. Classic intimidation, Michael nodded. I've encountered similar tactics investigating other stories connected to powerful families. The fact that they're moving this quickly suggests they're genuinely concerned about what you might have found. Eleanor retrieved the key to the hidden room. Let me show you what we've discovered. Michael's professional demeanor gave way to visible amazement as they entered the investigation room. This is extraordinary, he breathed, scanning the meticulously preserved materials. A private investigation maintained over 3 generations. I've never seen anything like it. Harold Morrison was obsessed with solving Charlotte's disappearance, Walter explained. Started with his father's notes and continued for decades. Neighbors thought he was just an eccentric recluse, but he was actually building this case. Eleanor shared their discoveries about Charlotte's evidence documenting systematic harassment of female teachers and the potential connection to Ridgeline Quarry. Michael listened intently, occasionally taking notes but mostly absorbing the information, with the focus of someone who had investigated many complex cases. Where is Charlotte's evidence now? He asked. Secure at my house, Walter replied. After Hargrove's visit, we thought it safer off-site. Michael nodded approvingly. Good instinct. The Hargroves still wield considerable influence in this county. Judges, law enforcement, local officials, many owe their positions to family connections or support. As they continued reviewing the materials, Michael's journalistic experience provided context Eleanor and Walter had lacked. This pattern of transferring or dismissing teachers who raised complaints was distressingly common historically, he explained. School boards were often dominated by the same prominent families who controlled local politics. Young female teachers were particularly vulnerable, typically unmarried, living in boarding houses, financially dependent on positions that could be terminated without cause. Charlotte Reed was building a case against this system, Eleanor said. She was collecting evidence not just about her own experience, but patterns affecting multiple teachers, which would have been extraordinarily threatening to men like Councilman Hargrove, Michael agreed. In 1952, such allegations against prominent citizens would have been considered scandalous enough to destroy careers and family reputations, even without criminal charges. They spent hours systematically reviewing the investigation materials, with Michael bringing professional perspective to Harold Morrison's decades of work. The most compelling evidence pointed to the Ridgeline Quarry as the likely location where Charlotte Reed's body might have been disposed of, followed by the convenient highway project that buried the site under tons of excavated material. The timing is suspicious, Michael noted, examining the records of the highway project. Initial plans didn't include using the quarry as a fill site. That decision was made after Charlotte's disappearance, with expedited approval from the county commission. Guess who chaired that commission? Hargrove, Eleanor guessed. Michael nodded grimly. Marcus Hargrove moved from city council to county commission just months before Charlotte disappeared. His first major action was approving the modified highway plan. The implications hung heavily in the room. What had begun as Eleanor's discovery of historical documents was evolving into evidence of a potential murder and cover-up orchestrated by one of the region's most powerful families, a family whose influence continued into the present day. What can actually be done after 70 years? Eleanor asked. Even with this evidence, is justice still possible? Michael considered the question thoughtfully. Criminal prosecution would be challenging but not impossible. There's no statute of limitations on murder, and modern forensic techniques could potentially recover evidence even after decades. The greater impact, however, might be historical truth and accountability for institutions that enabled abuse. The Hargrove family would fight exposure with everything they have, Walter warned. Undoubtedly, Michael agreed, which is why we need to proceed strategically. I have contacts at the State Bureau of Investigation who specialize in cold cases. They could evaluate whether there's sufficient evidence to justify excavation at the quarry site. Eleanor found herself at another crossroads. Pursuing this investigation would likely bring more unwanted attention from powerful people determined to keep their family secrets buried. The rational choice would be to hand over Charlotte's evidence to Michael and step away, focusing on her immediate challenges of renovation and relocation. Yet something about Charlotte Reed's courage in standing alone against systemic abuse resonated deeply with Eleanor. This young teacher had risked everything to document the truth, only to disappear before justice could be served. Harold Morrison and his father had dedicated decades to preserving that truth when it would have been easier to let it fade away. Could Eleanor do any less, having become the unexpected guardian of their work? "I want to help," she said finally. "Whatever risks are involved, Charlotte deserves justice even decades later." Michael studied her with newfound respect. "It won't be easy. The Hargroves will escalate their efforts to suppress this information once they realize we're actively investigating." "I understand," Eleanor replied, surprised by her own certainty. "But I can't just walk away knowing what I know now." They developed a plan for proceeding. A vehicle approached outside, Ben's truck returning with additional supplies for the renovation. The immediate practical reality of Eleanor's situation reasserted itself. She had less than a week before, needing to vacate her cottage, with only one bedroom at Willow Creek Farm, close to being habitable. "We should continue this discussion elsewhere," Michael suggested, recognizing the complications of workers moving throughout the house. "And we need to document everything properly before approaching official channels." They agreed to meet at Walter's home that evening to photograph and catalogue all the evidence. In the meantime, Eleanor would need to balance the pressing renovation requirements with this unexpected investigation. As Michael departed with promises to contact his cold case connections discreetly, Eleanor turned her attention back to Ben and his renovation crew. "Making good progress on the west bedroom," Ben reported. "Electrical is complete in that section. Plumbing for the adjacent bathroom should be functional by tomorrow. Kitchen will take another week for full functionality, but you'll have running water and basic cooking facilities in 3 days." Eleanor thanked him, mentally calculating her remaining funds against the essential work. The financial picture remained precarious, but perhaps slightly less desperate than initially feared. Ben had discovered salvageable materials throughout the house that reduced some costs, and his crew worked efficiently without the padding, sometimes added to renovation estimates. "One odd thing," Ben mentioned as they reviewed the progress. "We found some old newspapers stuffed into a wall cavity we opened, dating from 1952. Usually that's normal in old renovations, but these were specifically about that missing teacher. Case from back then. Thought you might find it interesting given the property's history." Eleanor accepted the brittle yellowed papers with practiced casualness, though her heart raced at this new connection. "Thanks, I'll look through them later." After Ben returned to his work, Eleanor examined the newspapers in private. They contained articles about Charlotte's disappearance that weren't duplicates of those in the hidden room collection, including one reporting that Charlotte's car had been discovered abandoned near Ridgeline Quarry 3 weeks after she vanished, a detail not previously mentioned in the investigation materials. This new information confirmed the quarry connection and raised questions about why this detail wasn't more prominently featured in Sheriff Morrison's investigation? Had this evidence been deliberately suppressed in the official record? Had Harold Morrison hidden these specific newspapers during a renovation, creating another layer of preserved evidence? That evening, Eleanor met Walter and Michael at the Abernathy farmhouse, bringing the newly discovered newspapers that added another piece to the puzzle. Michael had already begun organizing the evidence chronologically, creating a timeline of Charlotte's last known movements and the subsequent investigation. These newspaper clippings are significant, Michael noted, examining Eleanor's discovery. The fact that Charlotte's car was found near the quarry, but this detail was minimized in official reports, suggests deliberate obfuscation. I've requested the original police reports through a contact, but they may have been lost or altered decades ago. Eleanor studied the emerging timeline, noting how quickly the search had shifted away from the quarry location, despite the car discovery. It's like they deliberately looked everywhere except the most obvious place. Classic misdirection, Michael agreed. If Councilman Hargrove was involved in her disappearance and had influence over the investigation, he would have ensured attention, focused elsewhere. The conversation shifted to their next steps. Michael had contacted a trusted detective with the State Bureau of Investigation who specialized in cold cases, arranging a confidential meeting for the following day. Meanwhile, Walter had reached out to a retired surveyor who had worked on the highway project in the 1950s, hoping for additional information about the quarry filling operation. As they worked, Eleanor found herself drawn to Charlotte's personal effects, the small collection of photographs showing a smiling young woman with bright eyes and a determined expression. In one photo, Charlotte stood proudly before her first classroom, radiating hope and purpose. In another, she posed with fellow teacher Marion Ellis on the steps of their boarding house, both laughing at some forgotten joke. She was just starting her life, Eleanor murmured, affected by the humanity behind the historical case, 23 years old, with her whole future ahead of her. That's why this matters even 7 decades later, Michael said quietly. Not just for legal justice, which may be limited by time and evidence, but for historical truth. Charlotte Reed wasn't just a mysterious disappearance or a local legend. She was a young woman who stood against powerful men when doing so required extraordinary courage. Eleanor nodded, feeling an unexpected kinship with this long-vanished teacher. Both had faced crossroads where the easier path would have been silence and compliance. Charlotte had chosen to document the truth despite the risks. Now Eleanor faced her own choice about whether to pursue that truth despite potential consequences. The next morning brought unexpected developments on multiple fronts. Ben called Eleanor early, his usual measured tone replaced with excitement. "We've found something while opening the wall for the new bathroom plumbing. You should come see this immediately." When Eleanor arrived at Willow Creek Farm, Ben led her to the upstairs bathroom, where workers had removed sections of lath and plaster to access the water pipes. Behind the wall, they had discovered a small metal container similar to the one found in the spring house, deliberately placed within the wall cavity during some previous renovation. "Thought you should see it before we proceeded," Ben explained, "given your interest in the house's history." Eleanor thanked him, maintaining a calm exterior while her mind raced with possibilities. Had Harold Morrison hidden additional evidence throughout the house as a precaution against the hidden room being discovered? She carefully removed the container, explaining she would examine its historical significance later. Alone in her car, Eleanor opened the container to find more of Charlotte Reed's documentation, including what appeared to be photographic negatives carefully preserved in protective sleeves, labeled simply "Insurance" in Charlotte's handwriting. Without equipment to develop or view the negatives properly, their specific contents remained a mystery, but their deliberate preservation suggested significance. Eleanor drove directly to Walter's house, where Michael had arranged for the retired State Bureau of Investigation detective to review their evidence. Detective Sarah Lawson, though officially retired, maintained both the sharp analytical mind and the authoritative presence developed over decades investigating complex cases. Now in her 60s, she had specialized in cold cases for the last 15 years of her career. "Impressive collection," Lawson commented after examining the accumulated materials. "Most cold cases suffer from missing or deteriorated evidence. This is remarkably well preserved and meticulously documented. Will it be enough to justify reopening the case officially?" Michael asked. Lawson considered this carefully. The documentation of systemic harassment and Charlotte's evidence collection prior to her disappearance establishes clear motive. The connection to Ridgeline Quarry through multiple sources, including the newly discovered newspaper reporting her abandoned car, provides a likely location. The subsequent filling of that quarry through a hastily approved county project creates circumstantial evidence of a cover-up. She paused, reviewing her notes. "It's not definitive proof, but it's sufficient to justify a preliminary investigation, including potentially ground-penetrating radar at the quarry site to determine if full excavation might be warranted." Eleanor presented the newly discovered container with the photographic negatives. "These were hidden in a wall at Willow Creek Farm. We haven't been able to view them yet." Lawson examined the negatives with professional interest. "I have contacts at the State Forensic Lab who could develop these properly, maintaining chain of custody if they prove evidentially significant. Historical negatives require careful handling to preserve any remaining image." The conversation was interrupted by Walter receiving a call from his neighbor. "Eleanor," he said after hanging up, expression grave. "There are people at Willow Creek Farm asking questions. Not Garrett or Hargrove this time. Men in suits claiming to be from the county assessor's office, wanting to inspect the property for tax evaluation purposes." The timing was too suspicious to be coincidence. The Hargroves must have connections in the county government, Michael surmised. They're escalating their efforts to find whatever evidence might remain at the house. "I need to get back there," Eleanor said, rising immediately. "Ben and his crew are still working. They don't know about any of this." "I'll come with you," Detective Lawson offered, her official manner shifting to one of protective concern. "County assessors don't travel in groups or show up unannounced. Something's not right." The drive back to Willow Creek Farm seemed interminable, Eleanor's mind racing with possibilities. Had she locked the hidden room before leaving earlier? Would Ben's crew have inadvertently revealed anything significant to these visitors? Most concerning, how had the Hargroves known to escalate their search so quickly, almost as if they were aware of new developments? As they turned onto the long driveway, Eleanor spotted multiple vehicles parked near the house, 2 unmarked sedans and an official-looking county truck. Men in suits were speaking with Ben outside, while others appeared to be conducting some kind of inspection around the property perimeter. Detective Lawson assessed the situation with professional calm. "Let me take the lead. Whatever authority they're claiming, I still have contacts who can verify legitimacy." Eleanor agreed gratefully, her natural shyness making confrontation difficult, despite her growing determination to protect Charlotte's legacy. As they approached, Ben looked relieved to see Eleanor arriving with unknown reinforcement. "Ms. Thornton," one of the suited men greeted her with practiced cordiality. "I'm Robert Chandler from the county assessor's office. We're conducting updated property evaluations for tax purposes following recent sales. Just a routine inspection." Detective Lawson stepped forward, her bearing unmistakably authoritative despite her civilian clothes. "I'm Sarah Lawson, formerly with the State Bureau of Investigation. May I see your official identification and inspection authorization? The man's composure wavered slightly at this unexpected challenge. He produced identification that appeared official at first glance, though Eleanor noticed Detective Lawson, studying it with narrowed eyes. "Interesting," Lawson commented. "The county assessor's office typically schedules evaluations with property owners, especially for occupied structures, and they certainly don't require 4 personnel for a standard assessment. The property's historical designation necessitates additional documentation," Chandler replied smoothly, though his colleagues had grown noticeably tenser. "Willow Creek Farm doesn't have historical designation status," Eleanor pointed out, finding her voice. "That would require an application I haven't submitted." The inconsistencies accumulated rapidly as Detective Lawson continued her professional questioning, revealing that these men were almost certainly not legitimate county officials. Their knowledge of standard assessment procedures was superficial, at best, and when Lawson mentioned contacting the actual county assessor, whom she knew personally, to verify their assignment, the men abruptly concluded their inspection and prepared to leave. "This property has significant historical value that many people find interesting," Chandler remarked as a parting comment, his cordial tone now underlaid with unmistakable warning. "Sometimes historical preservation requires specialized expertise. Miss Thornton, you might consider professional consultation before proceeding with renovations that could damage irreplaceable features." As the vehicles departed, Ben approached Eleanor with concern. They were asking specific questions about any hidden rooms or storage spaces we might have discovered during renovation. Seemed unusually interested in the walls we've opened. "I didn't tell them about the metal container we found earlier. Something felt off about their approach." "You have good instincts," Detective Lawson confirmed. "Those weren't county assessors. The identification had official elements, but inconsistent formatting compared to actual county credentials." "The Hargroves are getting desperate," Michael observed, having arrived separately during the confrontation. "Sending people posing as officials crosses into potentially criminal territory." Eleanor felt a chill at how quickly events were escalating. What had begun as her discovery of historical documents was now attracting increasingly aggressive attention from powerful people determined to keep decades-old secrets buried. "We need to secure the hidden room completely," she decided, "and I should probably not stay here alone until we better understand what we're dealing with." Detective Lawson agreed. "I'll expedite processing of the photographic negatives through my forensic contacts. If they contain what I suspect, direct photographic evidence linking Councilman Hargrove to Charlotte's disappearance, we'll have stronger grounds for official intervention." As they secured the property, ensuring the hidden room was locked, and checking that no actual damage had been done by the false inspectors, Eleanor experienced a surprising emotion beneath her anxiety: resolute determination. The shy widow, who had purchased this foreclosed farm seeking only shelter, had discovered not just historical secrets, but her own capacity for courage when facing intimidation. "You're handling this remarkably well," Walter commented as they completed their security checks. "Most people would be overwhelmed." Eleanor considered this assessment. 6 months ago, I would have been. After James died, I could barely function through basic daily tasks, let alone stand up to powerful people trying to intimidate me. But something about Charlotte's courage after all these years, it puts my own challenges in perspective. The discovery of Charlotte Reed's evidence had given Eleanor something beyond the farmhouse itself, a purpose that transcended her personal loss, connecting her to a legacy of determination that had sustained 3 generations of Morrisons in their quest for justice. Whatever came next in this increasingly complex situation, Eleanor knew she could not abandon that legacy, regardless of the personal cost. As evening fell over Willow Creek Farm, Eleanor gathered essential belongings to temporarily relocate to Walter's guest room until security concerns could be addressed. Looking back at the weathered farmhouse that had drawn her with its dignified resilience despite years of neglect, she felt a renewed commitment to both the physical restoration and the historical truth it protected. Charlotte Reed stood alone against powerful men and paid the ultimate price, she murmured to herself as she locked the door behind her. Harold Morrison spent decades preserving her truth when others wanted it forgotten. I won't be the one who fails them both when justice might finally be possible. The shy widow, who had purchased a foreclosed farm out of desperate necessity, had found something beyond shelter. She had found her voice and the courage to use it for someone who had been silenced decades before. 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity as Eleanor balanced the urgent renovation of Willow Creek Farm with the increasingly complex investigation into Charlotte Reed's disappearance. From the safety of Walter Abernathy's guest room, she coordinated with Ben's construction crew each morning before joining Detective Lawson and Michael for strategy sessions each afternoon. The photographic negatives discovered in the wall had been carefully processed by Detective Lawson's forensic contacts, revealing images more damning than anyone had anticipated. Charlotte Reed had documented multiple incidents of Councilman Marcus Hargrove in compromising situations with female teachers, including one photograph clearly showing him threatening a visibly distressed young woman in his office. Most significantly, one negative contained an image of official school board documents, with Hargrove's signature authorizing the dismissal of a teacher who had made unfounded accusations against respected community members, direct evidence of the retribution. Charlotte had documented in her notes, "These photographs provide context that transforms Charlotte's written evidence from allegations to documented fact," Detective Lawson explained as they reviewed the processed images. She wasn't just collecting rumors, she was systematically building a case with multiple forms of evidence. And the Hargroves have been covering up this legacy for 70 years, Michael added, his journalist's instinct for the story strengthening. Not just the potential murder, but the systematic abuse of power that preceded it. Eleanor studied the photographs with mixed emotions, vindication that Charlotte's evidence was as significant as they had suspected, but also horror at the clear pattern of predatory behavior and institutional protection revealed. "What happens next?" she asked. Detective Lawson had been methodically building an official case for reopening the investigation. "I've secured preliminary approval for ground-penetrating radar at Ridgeline Quarry. It's being framed as an environmental assessment rather than a criminal investigation to avoid premature attention, but the real purpose is to determine if there's sufficient anomaly evidence to justify excavation." "How soon?" Walter asked. 2 days, Lawson replied. "The specialized equipment is being brought in from the State Forensic Division. We'll have a small window to conduct the assessment before questions start being asked." This timeline created both urgency and practical challenges. Eleanor's deadline to vacate her rental cottage was now just 3 days away, meaning she needed at least basic habitability at Willow Creek Farm, regardless of the ongoing investigation. Meanwhile, the fake county assessors had not returned, but suspicious vehicles had been noted driving slowly past the property, suggesting continued surveillance. "I can't abandon the renovation," Eleanor said firmly. "Whatever happens with Charlotte's case, I still need somewhere to live by Saturday." Detective Lawson nodded understandingly. "We'll maintain discreet security during the critical period. My former colleagues at the Bureau owe me a few favors. We'll have unmarked surveillance during construction hours and overnight monitoring until the quarry assessment is complete." The practical logistics occupied Eleanor's morning as she worked with Ben to accelerate completion of the essential living spaces. By leveraging every available resource and focusing solely on basic functionality rather than aesthetic finishing, they had made remarkable progress. The west bedroom now had electricity. The adjacent bathroom had running water and basic fixtures, and the kitchen could support fundamental cooking needs, if not gourmet preparation. We're cutting it close, but you'll have minimal habitability. By your deadline, Ben assured her, reviewing the remaining work. Not comfortable by any standard, but technically livable while we continue the broader renovation. Eleanor thanked him sincerely, aware that his team had worked beyond normal hours to meet her urgent timeline. Ben had proven not just skilled, but trustworthy, managing his crew's curiosity about the unusual activity surrounding the property without revealing anything about Eleanor's discoveries. That afternoon, as Eleanor sorted through boxes of belongings to determine what she absolutely needed for the initial move, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Miss Thornton," a smooth voice greeted her. "This is Senator David Hargrove. I believe we met briefly at your property recently." Eleanor's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice neutral. "Yes, I remember. I'm calling to apologize for any confusion regarding the county assessment team. It appears there was a miscommunication about scheduled inspections. More importantly, I wanted to extend a personal invitation to discuss Willow Creek Farm and its historical significance to our community." The carefully worded overture contained no direct threats or acknowledgement of the false inspectors, maintaining plausible deniability while clearly communicating that Hargrove remained involved and interested. "Thank you for the invitation," Eleanor replied carefully, following the guidance Detective Lawson had provided for potential contact. "However, I'm currently focused on essential renovations to make the property habitable. Perhaps once that's complete, we could discuss its historical aspects." "Of course," Hargrove responded smoothly. "However, I should mention that the County Historical Commission is considering emergency designation for Willow Creek Farm, based on its architectural significance. Such designation would immediately halt all renovation work pending historical assessment, potentially for several months. The veiled threat was unmistakable. Hargrove was offering Eleanor a choice between voluntary cooperation or forced compliance through bureaucratic intervention that would render her homeless by her looming deadline. "That's an interesting development," Eleanor managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'd certainly want to see the documentation supporting such an unusual emergency designation, as would my attorney, I'm sure." A slight pause suggested Hargrove hadn't expected such direct pushback. "Legal proceedings can be unnecessarily adversarial, Ms. Thornton. I'm simply offering an opportunity to discuss matters of mutual interest regarding the property's history. My family has connections to Willow Creek Farm, dating back generations, and we have a natural interest in preserving accurate historical context." "I appreciate history as much as anyone, Senator," Eleanor replied. "In fact, I find the complete historical record quite fascinating, especially aspects that might have been overlooked in official accounts." The implication hung in the air between them, Eleanor signaling her awareness of the suppressed history, while Hargrove attempted to gauge exactly what she had discovered and who else might know. "Perhaps we should meet to discuss these historical perspectives," he suggested, his tone hardening slightly beneath the professional courtesy. "I have time tomorrow morning, if that's convenient." "Unfortunately, my schedule is fully committed through the weekend with the renovation timeline," Eleanor declined. "I'll certainly contact you when I'm able to focus on historical matters, rather than immediate habitability concerns." After ending the call, Eleanor immediately contacted Detective Lawson to report the conversation. "He's escalating the pressure while still maintaining deniability," Lawson analyzed after hearing the details. "The threat of emergency historical designation is clever, It would effectively prevent you from occupying the property while giving them time to find Charlotte's evidence through official channels. Can they actually do that? Eleanor asked worriedly. They could try, Lawson acknowledged. The Hargrove influence extends through multiple county departments. However, such designations typically require documentation and public hearings. They're bluffing with a threat they hope you won't challenge. This assessment provided little comfort as Eleanor continued preparations for her imminent move. The accelerating pressure from the Hargrove family confirmed the significance of Charlotte's evidence, but also increased the personal risk Eleanor faced as its custodian. What had begun as her discovery of historical documents was evolving into direct confrontation with one of the region's most powerful political families. The following day brought the critical ground-penetrating radar assessment at Ridgeline Quarry. Detective Lawson had arranged the operation under environmental assessment documentation, bringing in a specialized team from the State Forensic Division disguised as geological surveyors. Eleanor, Walter, and Michael observed from a distance. As the team methodically scanned sections of the quarry that historical records indicated had been filled during the 1954 highway project. What exactly are they looking for? Eleanor asked as they watched the slow, methodical work. Anomalies in the substrate density, Michael explained, having researched the technology. Human remains create distinctive patterns in radar returns, even after decades. They're also looking for any non-organic materials that wouldn't naturally occur in filled dirt, clothing fragments, personal effects, anything that might suggest human remains. The assessment took hours, the team working with meticulous precision to document their findings. By late afternoon, Detective Lawson approached their observation position with guarded optimism. We have multiple anomalies, consistent with potential human remains, she reported quietly. Not definitive, but sufficient to justify limited excavation under cold case protocols. I've already initiated the paperwork for an official investigation. How soon could excavation begin? Walter asked. 3 to 5 days for the paperwork to clear, assuming no political interference, Lawson replied, the qualification hanging heavily in the air. Once the investigation becomes official, the Hargrove family will undoubtedly learn about it. Their influence might not be able to stop the process entirely, but they could certainly delay it. We need to be prepared for their reaction when they realize we're actively pursuing Charlotte's case, Michael warned. Their approaches so far have been relatively subtle. That could change quickly. Eleanor considered these implications as they returned to Walter's farm. Her deadline to vacate the cottage was now just 2 days away, meaning she would need to complete her move to Willow Creek Farm before the excavation began and before the Hargroves potentially escalated their efforts to suppress Charlotte's evidence. I should move the most essential items tomorrow, she decided. Just enough to make the west bedroom and kitchen functional. The rest can wait until we have a better understanding of the security situation. That evening, Eleanor's sister-in-law Grace called, concerned about the minimal updates she'd received during what was supposed to be Eleanor's moving process. Is everything okay with the new place? Grace asked. You've been so vague about the renovation. Do you need help with the move? I could drive down this weekend. Eleanor hesitated, torn between her desire to keep Grace safely uninvolved and her need for practical assistance. It's complicated, she admitted. The renovation is progressing, but there have been some unexpected developments with the property. What kind of developments? Grace pressed, her concern evident. After careful consideration, Eleanor shared a limited version of events, discovering historical documents related to Charlotte Reed's disappearance while omitting the more dangerous details about the Hargrove family's involvement and the ongoing investigation. Eleanor, this sounds like something from a mystery novel. Grace exclaimed. "You bought a house and stumbled into a 70-year-old cold case. That's extraordinary." "It's been overwhelming," Eleanor admitted, "but also purposeful somehow, like finding something important to do beyond just surviving day to day." Grace's voice softened. "That's the first time since James died that I've heard you sound truly engaged with anything. Whatever this mystery is, it seems to be good for you in some way." This observation struck Eleanor profoundly. Her grief over James had been so consuming that she'd existed rather than lived for 14 months, going through necessary motions, without genuine connection to anything beyond her loss. Charlotte Reed's case had somehow broken through that isolation, giving her a purpose that transcended her personal tragedy. "I think you're right," Eleanor acknowledged. "As complicated and sometimes frightening as this situation is, it's forced me to engage with the world again, to make decisions and take stands rather than just reacting to circumstances." Grace insisted on coming to help with the move, despite Eleanor's concerns, and they eventually compromised on Grace arriving the following afternoon to assist with essential items while the construction crew was still present, ensuring she wouldn't be alone at the property. The next morning brought another unexpected development when Ben called Eleanor early, his voice urgent. "We found something else hidden in the walls, something big. You need to see this immediately. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us."